Elias Thorne lived at the very top of the world. Not just in a tall building, but in a life built so high up it seemed to float above everything ordinary. His home was the entire top floor of a glittering skyscraper, a place of such immense quiet and space it felt more like a museum than a place where someone actually lived. The heart of this empire was his bedroom. It was his sanctuary, his command center. The room was huge but almost empty by design. Everything was shades of gray and cream. The only color came from the wall of windows that showed the whole city stretched out below, a carpet of twinkling lights at night and a landscape of concrete and glass by day. There were no family photos on the shelves, only a few expensive sculptures and rows of serious-looking books that looked like they'd never been opened. The air always smelled faintly of clean linen and filtered oxygen, with no surprises. And the door to this room, that door was something special. It wasn't a normal door. It was made from a single heavy piece of dark wood, thick and solid. When it was closed, it shut out the rest of the penthouse completely. For 30 years, that door had been like a barrier. On one side was Elias Thorne, the billionaire, the decision-maker, the man whose name was in the news. On the other side was the world that wanted a piece of him. Every morning, his day began the same way. A gentle, silent light would wake him up, simulating a sunrise. He'd sit up in his vast, perfectly made bed, and his eyes would go to the city first. Then, he'd walk across the cool, silent floor and place his hand on that heavy oak door. He'd pull it open and step through. What he saw on the other side never changed. It was his grand living room, just as pristine and empty as he'd left it the night before. The sun would be coming up, painting lines of gold across the polished floor. A screen on the wall would flicker to life, showing his schedule for the day. Meetings in different time zones, stock reports, charity galas. It was a view of total control. He had built this life brick by brick, deal by deal. He believed, down to his bones, that this was the reward for all his work. This silence, this order, this predictable, perfect view. It was his proof that he had made it. He thought that view, that feeling, was permanent. He believed that nothing could ever really touch him here, in this perfect space he had created for himself. The door was his guarantee. It was the line between him and everything else. And for 30 years, that line had held firm. For a while, everything stayed just the way he liked it. The silence, the order, the view. But then, little things started to happen. Tiny, almost invisible cracks began to show in his perfect world. It started with the book. He had a favorite, a very old and valuable copy of a seafaring adventure story he'd loved as a boy. He always kept it in the exact same spot on a certain shelf. One evening, he went to look at it just to feel the old leather cover. But it wasn't there. It was lying flat on the coffee table, about 3 feet away. He frowned. He had not touched it. The cleaning staff were never allowed in this room unless he was present, and he hadn't called them. He must have moved it himself and forgotten, he decided. He put it back, a little annoyed with his own memory. A few days later, it was a smell. He walked into the great room from his bedroom and stopped. The air had a faint, sweet smell to it, like flowers, lavender maybe. It was gone as quickly as he noticed it, replaced by the usual scentless, clean air from the vents. He called the building manager. "Check the filtration system on my floor," he said. "There's a strange odor." They checked. They found nothing. "System is operating at peak efficiency, Mr. Thorne," they told him. The feelings were the strangest part. Sometimes, sitting in his enormous, quiet living room in the evening, he would get the sudden, certain sense that he was not alone. It was a prickling on the back of his neck, a feeling in the air. He would turn sharply, expecting to see someone, but there was only the furniture and the city lights. Once, he even spoke out loud. "Hello?" he said to the empty room. His voice sounded small and silly. He shook his head. This was ridiculous. He was a man who dealt in facts, in data, in billions. He did not believe in hunches or ghosts. So he went to the facts. He called the head of his security team, a very serious man who was paid an enormous amount of money to worry about everything. "Review all the access logs for the penthouse for the last month," Elias told him. "Check every camera angle, every entry point. I want to know if there has been any irregularity, any breach, no matter how small. The security chief returned the next day with a tablet full of charts and timelines. Mr. Thorne, he said, his voice confident, the system is airtight. No unauthorized entry. No malfunctions. The logs show only your entries and exits, and the 2 scheduled cleanings you supervised yourself. There is no one else. Nothing. Elias listened, but the feeling didn't go away. If the system was perfect, then the problem must be with him. He thought about the relentless pace, the endless decisions, the weight of it all. He was getting older. Maybe this was just stress. Maybe his mind, the tool he relied on most, was finally showing the strain that he decided to ignore it. He pushed the odd moments aside. The misplaced book was his own error. The smell was his imagination. The feeling of being watched was just fatigue. He told himself he was being foolish. His life was a machine he had built himself, and every part of it was under his control. A machine doesn't develop feelings. A perfect system doesn't let in ghosts. He had simply been working too hard. He needed to focus on the real world. The deals, the numbers, the things he could see and touch and measure that he almost convinced himself. But deep down, in a part of him that remembered being a small boy afraid of the dark, a tiny seed of doubt had been planted. The world outside his heavy oak door was under his command. But what if something was already inside? Not an intruder, but something else? Something the cameras couldn't see and the logs couldn't record. He pushed the thought away. But that night, as he got ready to close the door to his bedroom, he paused. He looked out into the shadowy living room one more time before shutting it. Just to be sure. The thing about trying to ignore a strange feeling is that the world has a way of forcing you to pay attention. It wasn't a big, dramatic event that broke the quiet of the penthouse. It was a sound. A simple, ordinary, completely out-of-place sound. Elias woke up that Tuesday not to his silent, glowing sunrise alarm, but to something else. His eyes opened in the gray pre-dawn light. The city outside his windows was quiet, just a few lonely lights blinking in the rain that streaked the glass. And then he heard it, a soft, rhythmic noise coming from the other side of his bedroom door. Scritch, scritch, scritch.it was a dry, gentle scraping sound. He lay perfectly still, listening. It wasn't the hum of the elevator. It wasn't the hiss of the air system. This was different. It was the sound of work. Simple, manual work. Like someone brushing something or polishing, or maybe even writing with a pencil. A slow curl of irritation, mixed with a colder thread of fear, tightened in his stomach. This was his space. This was the one place in the entire world that was supposed to be under his absolute control. He glanced at the clock. It was an hour before he ever woke up. No one, and he meant no one, had any reason to be in his home at this hour. That he sat up, the fine sheets pooling around him. The sound continued, steady and patient. Scritch, scritch, scritch. Maybe it was a branch, but they were 80 floors up. Maybe it was some building maintenance he hadn't been informed about, but they would have told him. They always told him that he swung his legs out of bed and put on the thick, soft robe that hung nearby. The fabric felt familiar, but his hands were tense. He walked silently across the floor, his bare feet making no noise. He stopped right in front of the big, dark oak door. The sound was clearer here. It was definitely coming from the great room. It was calm, unhurried. Someone was out there, just on the other side of this wood, doing something completely ordinary as if they had every right to be there. His first instinct, the one he'd used in boardrooms for decades, was to get data, to understand. He went to his bedside table and tapped the screen of a small tablet. It came to life, showing a grid of security camera views from all over the penthouse. The living room camera, the kitchen angle, the hallway feed. He tapped to enlarge them, his eyes scanning every pixel. Nothing. The living room was empty. The furniture sat in its usual places. The morning light was just starting to turn the room a soft blue-gray. He could see the spot where the sound seemed to be coming from, near the long marble breakfast bar. But on the screen there was nothing there. Just an empty stool, an empty stretch of counter. A cold, heavy feeling settled in his chest. The sound kept going. Scritch, Scritch, scritch. If the cameras showed nothing, then either the system was broken or he was losing his mind. The security chief had sworn the system was perfect. So what did that leave? He stood there, a very powerful man in a very expensive robe, feeling a vulnerability he hadn't known since he was a child. He wasn't used to this. He was used to having answers. He was used to being the one who made the rules. This sound was a rule he didn't understand. For a long minute, he just listened. The rain tapped on the window. The soft, strange scraping continued. This wasn't a ghost story sound, not a bang or a scream. It was somehow worse. It was a homely sound, a comfortable sound. It belonged in a cozy kitchen, not in his cold, silent palace in the sky that he knew he couldn't just go back to bed. He couldn't hide in his room. He had to know. The doubt, the little cracks from the past weeks, all gathered into a single, solid need. He had to open the door. His hand, usually so steady when signing papers worth millions, trembled just a little as he reached for the cool metal handle. He didn't throw the door open. He didn't call out. He turned the handle slowly, carefully, feeling the heavy mechanism click. He took a deep, silent breath, the kind you take before jumping into deep water. The scritch, scritch, scritch was the only sound in his world that he pulled the door open, just a crack at first. The sound became clearer. He opened it wider, his body tense, ready for anything. Or so he thought. He stepped through the doorway, into the soft light of the living room, and looked towards the breakfast bar. What he saw there made all the air leave his lungs. His grip on the door handle went slack. His mind, the brilliant mind that could unravel complex financial markets, simply stopped. Could not process what his eyes were showing him. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a thief. It was something so impossible, so quietly astonishing, that all he could do was stand there and stare, his heart hammering a strange, frantic rhythm against his ribs. The mystery was over, and the truth was more surprising than anything he could have imagined. The door was open now. There was no going back. The soft, gray morning light spilled from the huge windows, painting everything in a calm, quiet color. And there, in the middle of all that vast, expensive space, was a small, living scene that made no sense at all. That an old woman sat on one of the tall stools at his marble breakfast bar. She had her back to him. She was small, wrapped in a simple, well-worn cardigan over a faded dress. Her hair was a neat twist of silver, catching the light. She was bent over something on the counter, her shoulders moving gently with a steady, patient rhythm. In her hand was a yellow cloth, and she was polishing a small, dented copper pot. Scritch, scritch, scritch. That was the sound. She was cleaning that pot with a kind of gentle care he hadn't seen in years. The room around her was different. It wasn't wrecked or changed in a big way. It was like tiny pieces of a different world had been carefully placed inside his own. That knitted blanket, the color of autumn leaves, was draped over the back of his stark, modern sofa. A single ceramic mug, plain white, sat on the counter near her elbow, a little curl of steam rising from it. The air held a hint of that lavender smell, mixed with the scent of the tea and the tang of the metal polish. It was so quiet, so peaceful, and so completely, utterly wrong. It felt like he had stepped out of his bedroom and into a memory. His mouth was dry. He tried to speak, but his voice, the voice that commanded rooms full of important people, came out as a rough whisper. "Who are you?" he asked. The words hung in the quiet air. The rhythmic polishing stopped. The woman didn't jump. She didn't seem startled at all. She simply placed the cloth down carefully, set the little copper pot aside, and slowly turned on the stool to face him. Her face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from a long life, from smiling and maybe from worrying too. But her eyes were clear and a calm, light blue. She looked at him, really looked at him, and there was no fear in her gaze. No apology, just a quiet recognition, as if she had been waiting for him to finally show up. That a faint, soft smile touched her lips. "You've grown so tall," she said. Her voice was warm and a little thin like old paper. She said it the way someone might say, "The sun is out," or "The tea is ready." A simple fact. And in that moment, something broke loose inside him. It was a floodgate he didn't even know he had kept shut. That voice, those eyes, they were older, much older, but he knew them. He knew them from a time before skyscrapers, before deals, before he was Mr. Thorne. They belonged to a cramped, warm apartment that always smelled of soup and clean laundry. They belonged to the woman who used to read him stories, who bandaged his scraped knees, whose lap was a safe place to hide when the world felt too big. The word fell from his lips before he could stop it, a name he hadn't spoken in over 30 years. Aunt Clara? It sounded strange and fragile, like a precious, forgotten object taken out of a dusty box. This was his father's sister, the one who took him in when his parents died so suddenly, the one who raised him with a quiet, steady love in a world that had suddenly gone dark and frightening. He had left for university and, in his rush to become someone important, someone new, he had carefully, politely left that world behind. He sent a check every Christmas, a fat envelope of money to an old address. It was his duty, a line item on a list. And every year, the envelope came back, stamped return to sender. He told himself she must have moved, that she was probably fine. It was easier than digging deeper, easier than looking back. And now she was here, in his penthouse, polishing a pot at dawn. She nodded slowly, that same gentle look in her eyes. It's been a long time, Elias. He just stood there, rooted to the spot by the door, in his luxurious robe, feeling like a little boy who had been caught doing something wrong. The billionaire was gone. In his place was just a man, staring at a piece of his own heart he had forgotten he'd left behind. All the security systems, all the money, all the walls he had built. None of it had kept this out. The past had simply walked in, made itself a cup of tea, and waited for him to wake up. For a long moment, there was only the soft sound of the rain outside. The two of them just looked at each other, separated by the shining length of the marble floor. Him frozen in the doorway. Her sitting calmly on the stool, her hands folded in her lap now. The little copper pot gleamed between them on the counter. He was the first to move. He let go of the door handle, the heavy wood swinging shut behind him with a soft, final click. The sound seemed to wake him up a little from his shock. This was real. She was real. He didn't call security. He didn't shout. Instead, he walked forward, his bare feet quiet on the cool floor. He stopped a few feet away from her, not sure what to do with his hands. He felt awkward, like a guest in his own home. How? He started, his voice still rough with sleep and surprise. He cleared his throat. How are you here? His Aunt Clara, the word still felt strange and tender in his mind, let out a small, quiet sigh. It wasn't a sad sigh. It was the sound of someone settling in to tell a necessary story. She gestured to the stool next to hers. You should sit, she said. It's a bit of a tale. He hesitated, then pulled out the stool and sat. The polished marble felt cold through his robe. Up close, he could see more details. The careful darn in the elbow of her cardigan. The slight tremor in her hands when she reached for her tea mug. She looked small, and somehow very tired. She began to talk, her voice even and matter-of-fact. She told him about getting sick a few months back. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, stubborn kind of illness that comes with age and wears you down. The stairs in her old apartment building had become a mountain. The neighborhood itself, the one he vaguely remembered from childhood, had changed. The small shops were gone, replaced by sleek glass fronts. The old brick building she lived in had been sold. By Thorne Properties, she said softly, not as an accusation, just a fact. They were very polite. Gave me time to leave. Elias felt a hot prickle of shame on the back of his neck. He probably signed the papers for that project. It was just another deal, another line on a map. He never connected it to her, to that street, to that building. I didn't know where to go, she continued, taking a small sip of her tea. A nice young woman from the social services. She helped me. She found my old documents, the ones that listed you as my next of kin. She tried to call your offices. A faint, almost humorous smile touched her lips. She could never get through. You're a very hard man to reach, Elias. He looked down at his hands, resting on the cold marble. His assistants filtered everything. A call about an elderly relative would not have made the list. It would have been diverted, handled by some junior staffer with a form letter and a referral to a charity. "So," she said, setting the mug down, "I knew your name was on all those big buildings downtown. I still had the old address you used to write from university. It wasn't so far. I just came yesterday afternoon." She explained it so simply. She had walked slowly with her one small suitcase and a bag that held a few precious things, like the copper pot. She had arrived at the glittering lobby of his building, a tiny, frail figure amid the rushing people in expensive suits. She had told the doorman her name, that she was here to see her nephew, Elias. "And that nice young man at the door," she said. "He was so respectful. I told him I was your aunt, from out of town. I think he felt sorry for me, standing there. He asked the computer system if I was expected. It must have said yes, because he smiled and brought me right up in that fast elevator." Elias understood then. The building's AI security system. It was programmed for ultimate safety and convenience. It had biometric databases, DNA records from his own corporate health files, records that would include any immediate family for emergency medical purposes. When the doorman scanned her ID or even just entered her name, the system would have searched. It would have found a genetic match, a familial link buried deep in its data. The conclusion for a machine was logical. Family member. Authorized access. Welcome home. The very technology he had installed to keep the whole world out, to create his perfect private fortress, had scanned this frail old woman, recognized a piece of him in her, and unlocked every door. It had welcomed her in because, to a computer, she belonged here. She was family. He had built a wall around himself, but he had accidentally written the one person from his past a key. She had let herself in. She had found the kitchen, made herself some tea. She had seen the dust on a shelf and found a cloth. She had seen the little pot, tarnished from years, in her bag, and decided to polish it. She had made a corner of his cold, vast apartment feel like a home, because that was what she had always done. She had simply waited for him to find her. He looked from her peaceful, tired face to the shining copper pot. He remembered it now. It was the pot she used to make oatmeal for him on cold mornings before school. The past wasn't just knocking at his door. It had already come inside, made itself useful, and was waiting for him to remember. Sitting there on that cold stool, Elias felt a world of emotions crash over him, one after another. First was the shock, which was slowly fading. Then came a deep, heavy wave of shame. He looked at this woman, her hands resting gently on her lap, and saw the years he had let slip by. He saw the loneliness she must have felt, and he knew, with a sickening certainty, that he had been the cause of some of it. I sent letters," he said, the words sounding weak even to him. "Checks. Every Christmas. They always came back." She nodded slowly, her eyes understanding. "I moved after the landlord sold the building the first time," she said. "That was years ago now. Went to a smaller place. I meant to send you the new address. I started a letter a dozen times." She looked out at the rainy skyline for a moment. "But what would I say? Hope you're well. The rent went up. You were living in this world." She gestured gently around the vast room. "I didn't want to be a bother. Just a line from your past asking for something." Her saying that she didn't want to be a bother felt like a knife twisting in him. All his life, he had believed that providing money was the same as providing care. It was clean, simple, and it kept a safe distance. He had given her a number on a check, but he hadn't given her a phone call. He hadn't given her a visit. He had offered a transaction, when what she needed was a connection. He thought of all the Christmas Eves spent at fancy parties, the meaningless small talk, the clink of glasses. He could have spent one of them with her. He could have heard her stories, made sure she was warm, seen with his own eyes that she was okay. But it was easier to sign a check and believe the problem was solved. "And the sickness?" he asked, his voice low. "Oh, it comes and goes," she said, brushing it away with a wave of her hand, a gesture he remembered so well. It was how she'd always dismissed her own troubles. The doctors are very kind. It just made the stairs impossible. And with the new building coming, it was just time. Time. He had all the time in the world for deals and meetings, but he hadn't made any for her. He had assumed she was part of a finished chapter, a closed book. He never considered that her story was still being written, and that it had become a quiet, difficult story of its own. He looked around his perfect apartment. He saw it with new eyes. It wasn't a sanctuary. It was a vault. He had locked himself away in here with his money and his achievements, and he had locked everything else out. All the messy, human, important things. The love, the duty, the simple responsibility of looking after someone who had once looked after you. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was full of unspoken years. He watched as she reached out and touched the copper pot, running a finger over its now bright surface. "I kept it," she said softly, almost to herself. "Seemed silly, I suppose, but it was a good pot. Made the oats just right." A memory, sharp and clear, flashed in his mind. Him, maybe 8 years old, sitting at her Formica kitchen table, his feet not touching the floor, watching her stir that pot at the old stove. The warm, sweet smell filling the tiny kitchen. The sound of her humming. A feeling of absolute safety. That feeling was worth more than every single thing in this penthouse. And he had thrown it away. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry" seemed too small, too late. "Thank you" felt wrong for all the years of silence. So he just sat there, a billionaire in a robe, feeling poorer than he had ever felt in his life. He had been so busy building an empire that he had let his own kingdom, the small human kingdom of family and love, crumble to dust without even noticing. The rain streaked down the windows, blurring the city lights. The grand, impressive view he was so proud of was now just a gray smudge. The only thing that was clear, the only thing that was real and solid in the whole room, was the woman sitting beside him and the small, shining pot on the counter between them. It was the only thing he had left from what really mattered, and he had almost lost it for good. The heavy silence stretched on, but it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything that had been said, and everything that hadn't. Elias finally moved. He stood up from the stool, the legs scraping softly on the floor. His aunt watched him, her calm, blue eyes following him without worry. He didn't walk towards his phone to make a call. He didn't go to his computer. He walked slowly to the wall of windows and looked out at the rainy, waking city. For 30 years, this view had been a measure of his success. Today, it just looked like a picture behind glass. It had no weight, no warmth. He turned around and looked back at the scene in his living room. The knitted blanket on his cold sofa. The single teacup. The old woman, small and steady, waiting. She had created a little island of home right in the middle of his ocean of empty space. And he had been so blind, he had almost mistaken it for an intrusion. He walked back towards the breakfast bar. But he didn't sit down again. He went around to the other side, to the kitchen. It was a kitchen of shiny steel and dark stone, designed for chefs who would prepare elaborate meals for parties that never happened. He had never really used it himself. He opened a cupboard, then another, the doors making soft, hushed sounds. He was looking for something. He found what he needed in a high cabinet. A simple pot, modern and plain. He filled it with water from the sink and placed it on the large stove. He turned on a burner. A quiet, blue flame hissed to life. His aunt watched him, a gentle curiosity on her face. She didn't ask what he was doing. He came back around and sat on the stool beside her again. He looked at the little copper pot between them. "Would it still work?" he asked, his voice quieter now, more natural. A soft light seemed to come into her eyes. "Oh, I expect so," she said. "Good copper lasts forever, if you take care of it." The water began to simmer on the stove behind them. The sound was a comfortable, familiar one. It was a sound of preparation, of something about to begin. "You'll stay here," he said. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer made out of guilt. It was a simple, firm statement of fact. "This is your home now, too. We'll have the doctors come to see you here. Whatever you need." She didn't protest. She didn't say she didn't want to be a bother. She just nodded slowly, accepting. "That would be kind," she said. And then she added, "It's very quiet up here. Peaceful." He almost laughed. 4 years he'd called that peace. Now he understood it was just silence. But maybe, with her here, it could become peace again. The water started to boil. He got up, took the copper pot and carried it to the stove. He poured the old-fashioned oats he found in a pantry into the water, just as he had watched her do 1,000 times. He stirred slowly with a wooden spoon, feeling the gentle resistance, watching the mixture thicken. He wasn't the billionaire in that moment. He was just a man, making breakfast for the woman who had once made it for him. It was the only thing that felt right to do. The most important deal of his life wasn't across the city. It was right here in this kitchen, and it was about healing a broken connection. He brought 2 bowls of the simple oatmeal to the breakfast bar. He set one in front of her and kept one for himself. He sat down beside her. They ate in a comfortable quiet, the rain painting silent pictures on the windows. The oatmeal tasted plain, warm, and perfect. It tasted like a memory, but also like a new beginning. The sun, finally breaking through the clouds, didn't just light up the cityscape anymore. It reached across the marble floor and touched the edge of the knitted blanket. It warmed the side of the little copper pot. It lit up the steam from their bowls. Elias Thorne had opened his bedroom door to a mystery. He had found a truth more valuable than anything he owned. The greatest surprise wasn't an intruder. It was an invitation to come home, not to a place but to a person, to himself. The door to his perfect, lonely world had been opened, not by force, but by family. And for the first time in 30 years, he decided not to close it.